Hey, I'm really glad you're here. Take a moment to get comfortable wherever you are. Let your shoulders relax and let the day gently fall away. You don't need to do anything right now. Just listen and let the story unfold at its own pace. Whenever you're ready, we'll begin.
The Giant and the Hobbit, when the mountain learned to breathe. For centuries beyond counting, the mountain had been nothing more than stone. It rose from the earth like a frozen wave, its spine jagged, its shoulders buried in cloud. Snow clung to its higher ridges year-round, and dark forests wrapped its lower slopes like a cautious embrace. Travelers avoided it, not because of any written warning or spoken curse, but because the mountain felt aware. Winds there did not merely blow, they lingered. Shadows did not simply fall, they waited. The elders of nearby valleys called it Grondilspire, though no one remembered who had named it or why. Children were told never to look at it for too long. Shepherds swore their flocks grew restless when grazing too close. Birds altered their flight paths. Even the sun, at dusk, seemed reluctant to rest upon its crown. Yet for all its strange presence, Grondilspire had never moved, until the morning it breathed. It began as a sound so low it slipped beneath hearing. A tremor felt more in bone than in ear. The ground quivered gently, as though the earth were adjusting its weight. Pebbles rattled down slopes. The thin crack opened along a cliff face, exhaling a plume of dust that caught the dawn light like smoke. Then came the breath. A deep, slow exhalation rolled across the valley, pushing fog outward in wide, invisible waves. Trees bent, not from wind but from pressure. The river below stuttered in its flow, ripples racing backward as if startled. High above, where stone met cloud, two vast hollows filled with pale gold light. Eyes, the mountain's face, long mistaken for random ridges and shadows, shifted. A brow emerged. A cheekbone slid free of ice. Rock groaned against rock with the patience of something that had waited a very long time to move. The giant had awakened. He did not rise all at once. That would have shattered the world. Instead, he stirred carefully, as if remembering himself piece by piece. Fingers the size of watchtowers flexed free from the earth, shedding soil, uprooting trees that had grown between them for generations. Moss tore like old cloth. Roots snapped with dry, brittle sounds. His name, though no living tongue still spoke it, was Tharok Stoneborn. He had been old when time itself was young. As awareness seeped back into him, Tharok felt the ache of stillness deep within his core. Centuries of sleep had pressed his thoughts flat, turning memory into sediment. He remembered heat, molten rock, the roar of creation, the sky before it learned how to be blue. He remembered standing when mountains were still learning their shapes, when rivers had no names and creatures walked without fear of being small. He also remembered why he had slept. The memory returned slowly, like a scar aching before a storm. Voices, fire, the sharp sting of magic woven not for wonder but for control. He remembered being feared and then hunted, not with weapons, but with words that bound and promises that betrayed. So he had lain down. He had let the world forget him. Now, as his breath rolled again across the valley, and inhaled this time, deep and resonant, the giant felt something new pressing against his senses. Life. Not the ancient, roaring life he once knew, but something softer, fragile. Countless heartbeats fluttering like moth wings across the land below. Villages, roads, fields carved by small hands, fires burning not to challenge the dark, but to keep it politely at bay. Tharok frowned, a movement that sent boulders tumbling miles away. The world had grown small. Down in the nearest valley, the first scream split the morning calm. A farmer named Elric dropped his bucket as the earth shook beneath his feet. Milk spilled across the dirt, forgotten as he stared toward Grondil's spire. His mouth moved, but no words came. Around him, others froze, women clutching baskets, children mid-laughter, dogs growling low and confused. "The mountain," someone whispered. "The mountain is moving." Church bells rang not by order, but because their towers swayed hard enough to pull ropes loose. Birds erupted from treetops in chaotic swarms. Horses reared, eyes white with panic, and then they saw him. Tharok's upper body rose fully into the open sky, his shoulders tearing free of centuries of rock. Clouds wrapped around his chest like startled ghosts. His skin was stone layered over muscle, veined with glowing seams of amber light that pulsed gently with each breath. Cracks ran across him like ancient runes, filled with lichen and snow. He looked down. The giant's gaze swept the valley, slow and heavy, and where it passed, fear bloomed instantly. People fell to their knees. Some prayed, some ran, some simply stood, minds emptied by the sheer impossibility of what they were seeing. Tharok felt their fear like heat against his skin. He did not blame them. In his age, giants had walked openly. They had been shepherds of mountains, builders of landforms, keepers of balance. But memory stirred again, and with it came the knowledge that his kind had faded into legend, and legend into bedtime warnings. Giant, the world now whispered. Monster, he straightened a little more, careful not to crush the forest beneath him. A single misstep could erase a village. The weight of that knowledge settled heavily upon him. "I live," he said. His voice did not shout. It did not need to. The sound rolled outward, deep and layered, echoing off distant hills and vibrating through stone foundations. Windows shattered. Water leapt from wells. "I live," he repeated, softer this time. The words were less for the valley and more for himself. In response, a distant horn sounded from the southern road, sharp, urgent, soldiers, watchtowers signaling one another. Already, the small ones were organizing fear into action. Tharok felt a familiar weariness stir in his chest. It had not taken long. He turned his head slightly, peering beyond the valley, beyond the farmlands and rivers, toward the lands where crowns were forged and maps were drawn. He could almost hear the scribes sharpening quills, the generals tracing plans across tables. A giant had awakened. The world would not let that remain unanswered. As if sensing his thoughts, the sky darkened. Clouds thickened, pressing low around his shoulders. Thunder murmured, not in anger, but in uneasy recognition. Therox slowly lowered himself back toward the mountain, not to sleep, but to sit. Stone reshaped itself beneath him, forming a vast ledge. He rested his forearms on his knees, a posture strangely thoughtful for something so immense. Below, the valley trembled with activity. People fled toward the river crossings. Smoke rose from signal fires. Bells rang until ropes snapped. Yet amid the chaos, something else reached him. A sound too small to be heard, but not to be felt. A heartbeat. Not one of the thousands beating in panic, but a single, steady rhythm. Curious, unafraid. It pulsed faintly, like a candle flame refusing to flicker out in a storm. Therox's eyes narrowed slightly. Far below, near the edge of the forest where the land dipped into shadow, a figure stood still while others ran past, small even among the small folk, barely reaching the height of a wheat stalk, a hobbit. The giant did not yet know the hobbit's name. He did not know that this small figure would one day alter the course of his existence. But something ancient within him stirred, an instinct older than fear. The mountain had learned to breathe again. And somewhere below, the world had produced a soul brave or foolish enough to look up and wonder, not flee. Therox closed his eyes briefly, letting the mountain settle around him. The story had begun. A hobbit who refused to stay small. The hobbit's name was Bramblewick Thornfoot, though everyone in the low valley village of Willowbend simply called him Bram. He had been born small, even by hobbit standards. Where others of his kind grew stout and comfortably round, Bram remained wiry, his limbs thin but strong, his shoulders narrow yet stubbornly upright. His feet were large, as hobbit feet tended to be, toughened by years of walking barefoot over stone paths and forest roots. His hair, a mess of chestnut curls, refused to stay combed no matter how often his mother tried. His eyes, however, were what unsettled people most, too focused, too searching, as if he were always listening to something just beyond the edge of sound. Bram was 28 seasons old, an age when most hobbits had already settled into predictable lives, tending gardens, brewing ale, arguing lovingly over turnip yields and weather patterns. But Bram had never been predictable. While others memorized recipes, Bram memorized paths. While others learned which soil grew the sweetest potatoes, Bram learned which moss clung longest to north-facing rocks, which birds called just before storms, which trees groaned in the night as if remembering old pain. And most importantly, while others learned what to fear, Bram questioned why. That morning, when the mountain breathed, Bram was not in the village square or the fields. He was at the forest's edge, crouched beside an ancient oak whose roots twisted like knuckles pushing through the earth. He had been sketching the mountain. Not drawing it as people said it was, but as it felt. His charcoal paused mid-stroke when the ground trembled. Bram froze, not in fear, but in attention. The birds screamed and scattered. Leaves shook loose, fluttering down around him. The oak's bark vibrated beneath his fingers. And then came the breath deep, impossibly vast, carrying with it the scent of cold stone and old snow. Bram's heart skipped once, then steadied. Slowly he stood. When the others ran, when shouts echoed from the village and bells began their panicked chorus, Bram did not move with them. His feet rooted themselves to the earth as if answering a call older than instinct. And when the mountain opened its eyes, Bram looked straight back. He should have felt terror. Every story he'd ever heard told him he should. The giants were eaters of cattle, crushers of homes, bringers of ruin. Giants were what elders invoked when children wandered too far or asked too many questions. But what Bram saw was not rage. It was weariness. From his distance, the giant's eyes were little more than glowing points amid cloud and stone. Yet Bram felt their weight, not as a threat, but as a presence. Like standing before a storm that was deciding whether it wished to rain. Behind him, someone grabbed his arm. Bram. "Are you mad?" hissed old Mella, the herbalist, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "Run, by the roots, run." He gently pulled free. "Why?" he asked. She stared at him, incredulous. "Because it's a giant." "Yes," Bram said quietly, "but it's also alive." Mella slapped his shoulder. "Everything alive can still kill you, boy." She fled with the others, muttering prayers and curses in equal measure. Bram remained. He watched as soldiers' horns sounded in the distance. He watched smoke rise from signal fires along the ridges. He watched the giant lower himself into a seated position, moving with a care that made Bram's brow furrow. Care, he thought, that's not how monsters move. The giant spoke. "I live." The words rolled across the valley like distant thunder, rattling Bram's ribs. He staggered back a step, breath stolen, but not from fear, from awe. "I live," the voice said again, softer. Bram swallowed. Something deep within him, something that had never fit comfortably inside Willowben's neat routines, shifted into place. A question formed, sharp and insistent. If he lives, why did we let him become a mountain? By nightfall, Willowbend was half empty. Families packed what they could carry and crossed the river eastward, away from Grondilspire. The village council convened briefly, then dissolved into argument and panic. Some wanted to burn the remaining homes to deny shelter to the monster. Others wanted to barricade and wait for soldiers. Bram's parents argued in whispers by candlelight. "He's going to get himself killed," his father said, pacing, always staring at things he shouldn't. "He's not stupid," his mother replied, though her hands shook as she folded clothes. "Just different." Different had always been Bram's quiet curse. That night, as rain began to fall, thin and cold, Bram packed a small satchel. Bread, dried berries, his charcoal and sketchbook, a coil of twine, and the small bone flute his grandfather had carved for him long ago. His mother found him at the door. "You're leaving," she said, not asking. "Yes, to where?" Bram hesitated, then honestly up. And tears filled her eyes, but she did not stop him. She stepped forward and pressed her forehead to his. "Stay small," she whispered. "Small things survive." Bram hugged her tightly. "I don't think that's always true," he said. He slipped into the rain and did not look back. The forest welcomed him like an old friend. As Bram climbed the lower slopes of Grondilspire, the world changed. Trees grew thicker, older. Roots tangled into natural steps. The air cooled, heavy with damp earth and stone. The sounds of fleeing villagers faded, replaced by the slow, patient rhythms of a land that had never learned to hurry. Several times, the ground trembled faintly. The giant shifted above. Each tremor sent a thrill through Bram's chest, fear braided with something dangerously close to excitement. "As I'm really doing this," he thought. "I'm walking toward a giant." Near midnight, Bram reached a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. He stopped there, catching his breath, rain soaking his curls flat against his forehead. Above him, the giant's massive form loomed, partially obscured by cloud. Lightning flashed distantly, briefly illuminating stone muscles and ancient scars. Bram lifted his flute. He did not know why. He had never played it for an audience larger than a field mouse. But the silence felt wrong, too heavy. He played a simple tune. An old Hobbit walking song meant to keep feet steady on long journeys. The notes were soft, easily swallowed by wind and rain, but Bram played with care, pouring into the melody everything he could not put into words. Loneliness, curiosity, respect. Above, Tharok Stoneborn paused. The giant's head tilted slightly. As among the chaos of fear and the distant clamor of preparation for war, something impossibly small reached him. A sound not loud, not powerful, but deliberate, intentional. Music. Tharok frowned, not in anger, but confusion. The sound carried no challenge, no spellwork, no threat. It was offering. His ancient senses traced it downward, following the fragile thread of melody through stone and rain until it found its source. A single small figure on the mountain's shoulder, unarmed, unhidden. The giant felt something twist gently in his chest. Why does the small one not run? Bram finished the tune and lowered the flute, heart pounding. He felt suddenly foolish. The rain soaked through his clothes. His hands trembled, not from cold alone. Then the ground shifted, not violently, carefully. A massive finger, broad as a bridge, lowered slowly toward the outcrop, stopping several body lengths away. Steam rose where warm stone met cold rain. Bram swallowed hard. Every sensible instinct screamed at him to flee. He stayed. "I'm Bram," he said aloud, voice shaking but clear. "From Willowbend." The giant did not answer immediately. His finger remained still, unmoving, as if even a breath too strong might shatter what stood before him. At last, the mountain spoke, not with thunder this time, but with restraint. "You are very small," Tharok said. Bram let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Yes," he replied. "But I walk far." For a long moment, rain fell between them. Then, impossibly, the giant's deep voice carried something close to wonder. "So you do." And in that quiet exchange between stone and flesh, age and youth, power and fragility, the shape of the world began, ever so slightly, to change. The hobbit had refused to stay small, and the giant had noticed footsteps that shook the valley. Dawn arrived slowly, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise over Grondilspire. Mist clung to the mountain's lower slopes, wrapping stone and forest alike in a pale veil. From above, Tharok watched the light creep across the land, turning wet rock to gold and wet leaves to silver. He had not slept. Giants did not sleep as small folk did, not after waking from a centuries-long slumber. His mind remained alert, sifting through the strange events of the night. The hobbit, small, fragile, brave in a way that did not shout. Tharok had known warriors who marched into battle with roars and banners, convinced of their own immortality. He had known kings who hid fear behind crowns of gold. But this small one, this Bram, had approached with nothing but a flute and a steady voice. It unsettled him. Below, Bram stirred awake beneath a rocky overhang. His body ached from the cold and damp, but his mind buzzed with restless energy. For a long moment he lay still, listening. No thunderous movement, no crushing step, no death from above. He exhaled slowly. "So not eaten," he muttered. He sat up and rubbed his eyes. The giant was still there, seated against the mountain as if he had always belonged to it, which Bram supposed he had. In daylight, Tharok looked even more immense. The scale of him bent Bram's understanding of distance and size. A single arm rested along the slope, fingers curled loosely, stone-cracked nails the size of roofs. Bram stood, brushing dirt from his clothes. He called out, unsure if calling was even the right word. "Good morning." The giant's eyes shifted. The movement alone sent a shiver through the ground, subtle but unmistakable. Pebbles skittered downhill. Bram spread his feet instinctively, steadying himself. "Morning," Tharok repeated, testing the word as if it were an artifact from another age. His voice was still deep, still powerful, but something had changed. It no longer rolled like thunder. It settled like distant drums. "You did not flee," the giant said. Bram shrugged. "I slept instead." Tharok studied him. "Small ones usually run." "Most do," Bram agreed. "I don't always." Silence stretched between them, not awkward, but heavy with unspoken thought. Then the valley answered for them. A horn sounded again, closer this time. Sharper, more deliberate. Tharok's gaze drifted past Bram, down toward the plains. Lines of movement cut through the mist, tiny figures in formation, metal catching the light. Soldiers, dozens of them, perhaps more, hidden beyond the ridges. Bram followed his gaze. "Oh," he said softly, "they're early. They come to kill me," Tharok said, not bitterly, simply stating a pattern he had seen before. Bram frowned. "They don't know you. They know what I am. That's not the same thing." Tharok huffed a low breath. The exhale stirred the fog. It has always been enough. Below, banners unfurled, bright colors marking allegiance and authority. Drums began to beat, their rhythm meant to unify courage and drown doubt. Each beat struck Bram's chest like a warning. "They'll be afraid," Bram said. "Or afraid people do foolish things." The giant shifted, carefully, so carefully it was almost painful to watch. Therak began to stand. The mountain groaned. Stone cracked. Ancient pressure released itself in long, echoing rumbles. Trees bent as his weight shifted. Far below, soldiers stumbled as the ground shook harder now, their formations breaking. Bram's stomach lurched. "Wait," he called. "Please just wait." Therak paused mid-rise, one knee still pressed into the slope. "Why?" he asked. "Because every step you take right now will prove their fear correct," Bram said, voice tight but steady. "And once that happens, there's no walking it back." The giant looked at him, truly looked. "How else should I move?" Therak asked. "I cannot make myself smaller." "No," Bram said, "but you can make yourself slower." Therak considered this. Then, deliberately, he lowered himself again, not fully sitting, not standing. A compromise, a restraint. Below, a shout rang out. Someone had seen the movement. Orders barked. Shields raised. Arrows were notched. Bram's heart hammered. "They're going to shoot," he said. Therak's brow furrowed. "Those will not harm me." "I know," Bram snapped, then softened his tone. "But it will harm this." He gestured to the valley, to the villages, and to the fragile idea that maybe, just maybe, this didn't have to end the way old stories always did. The first arrow flew. It arced high, tiny against the sky, and struck Therak's shoulder with a sharp ping, shattering harmlessly against stone skin. Another followed, then dozens. Therak did not flinch. Bram did. "Stop," he shouted down the slope, waving his arms wildly. "Stop shooting, you're only making it worse." No one heard him. Or if they did, they dismissed him as panic made flesh. Therak felt something stir deep within him, not pain, but memory. This was how it had always begun: fear, distance, violence justified by scale. His fingers curled. The ground responded. A shockwave rippled outward, not a strike, but a consequence. Trees swayed violently. Several soldiers fell. Drums fell silent. Bram stumbled, barely keeping his footing. "Therak." He yelled, using the giant's name without thinking. The sound of it, his name, spoken without hatred, hit Therak harder than any weapon. He froze. The valley went quiet. Dust settled. Birds, startled into flight, circled uncertainly overhead. Therak slowly opened his hand. "I am trying," he said, voice low. "But the world listens poorly." Bram swallowed and nodded. "Yeah," he said, "it really does." Then, before his courage could fully abandon him, Bram did something profoundly foolish. He began to walk down the slope, toward the soldiers. Therak's eyes widened. Small one stop. Bram didn't. Every step he took felt like defiance written into his bones. His legs shook. His breath came fast. But he walked with his hands raised, empty, visible. Soldiers shouted as they noticed him. "Hold," someone yelled. "There's a hobbit." Arrows wavered. Bram stopped at a distance that felt both too close and impossibly far. "He's not attacking," Bram shouted. "He woke up, that's all." A captain stepped forward, helmet dented, eyes hard with fear and authority. "Get back, little one," he barked. "You don't understand what you're standing in front of." "I understand he hasn't crushed you." Bram shot back. And he could have. Murmurs rippled through the ranks. Tharok watched, utterly still. No giant in his memory had ever allowed a small one to stand between them and an army. No giant had ever been asked to wait. Bram turned, just slightly, glancing back up the mountain. Tharok met his gaze. In that moment, between raised arrows and trembling ground, something extraordinary occurred. The giant took a step backward. It was a small step by his measure, a mountain shifting its weight. But to the valley, it was a miracle. Dust rose. Rocks tumbled harmlessly away from the soldiers. The distance between them grew. A collective breath was released. Bram exhaled, knees nearly giving out. "He's listening," Bram said quietly. "Please, you should too." The captain hesitated. Fear still ruled his eyes, but now it was mixed with uncertainty. The footsteps that had once promised destruction had instead chosen restraint. And the valley, shaken, frightened, alive, stood on the edge of a choice that would echo far beyond its borders. The story was no longer about a giant alone. It was about what stood between him and the world, the weight of strength and the cost of kindness. Silence is heavier than noise when fear is involved. It pressed down on the valley after the giant stepped back, thick, uncertain, stretching between raised shields and trembling hands. The soldiers did not lower their weapons, but they did not fire either. Somewhere a drumbeat tried to restart and failed, the rhythm breaking apart under the weight of hesitation. Bram stood between two worlds. Behind him loomed Tharok Stoneborn, ancient, immense, capable of ending everything with a careless motion. Before him stood men trained to believe that strength existed only to dominate or destroy. And there he was, a hobbit with empty hands and a voice that felt suddenly far too small for the moment it occupied. The captain cleared his throat. "You," he said, pointing at Bram. "Move aside." Bram didn't. Instead, he turned fully to face the soldiers. Up close, he could see the cracks in their certainty. The way fingers clenched too tightly around spear shafts, the way eyes flicked upward again and again despite orders not to look. "He stepped back," Bram said. "How many monsters do that?" A murmur passed through the ranks. The captain's jaw tightened. "Monsters wait," he snapped. "They lull you into thinking you're safe." Tharok heard every word. He felt them settle against his chest like familiar stones. Accusations shaped by history, sharpened by survival. He had heard them before long ago in different tongues, from mouths that no longer existed. "I could leave," Tharok said suddenly. His voice rolled across the valley, but this time it carried something fragile beneath its power. The soldiers stiffened. Bram spun around. "Leave." "Yes," the giant said. "I can walk beyond these lands, beyond memory. The world would forget me again." Bram stared up at him. "That's not peace," he said quietly. "That's exile." Tharok's gaze softened. "It is safety." "For who?" Bram asked. The question lingered. Tharok did not answer immediately. Instead, he shifted his weight slowly, deliberately, settling into stillness once more. The mountain seemed to exhale with him. "When I walk," the giant said, the earth suffers. When I stand, the sky trembles. Everything I am carries consequence. That is the weight of strength. Bram nodded. I know. Tharok looked down, surprised. You do. My people plant trees knowing they'll shade someone else, Bram said. We build homes expecting they'll outlast us. We learn early that existing always costs something, just usually not on your scale. A faint, rumbling sound escaped Tharok's chest. It took Bram a moment to realize it was laughter. Small wisdom, the giant said. Heavy truth. Below, the captain lowered his sword a fraction. You speak well for a hobbit, he admitted grudgingly. But words don't stop stone. No, Bram agreed, but listening might. The captain hesitated, then raised his voice. Giant, if you mean no harm, swear it. Swear by whatever ancient thing you giants believe in. Tharok closed his eyes. Memory surged of oaths sworn beneath molten skies, of promises carved into bedrock, of betrayals that had taught his kind silence was safer than hope. Then he looked at Bram, at the small one who had stepped forward knowing he could be crushed by accident alone. I swear, Tharok said slowly, by the bones of the world that shaped me, I will not raise my hand against those who do not seek my destruction. The words sank into the earth itself, deep and resonant. The captain swallowed. Some soldiers lowered their shields. Others remained frozen, caught between orders and instinct. Bram felt the moment tipping. Kindness, he realized, was not gentle. It demanded exposure. That night, no attack came. The soldiers made camp at a careful distance. Fires burned low. Watch shifts doubled. Fear did not vanish, but it learned how to sit down instead of charge forward. Bram returned to the mountain's shoulder, exhaustion finally catching up to him. Tharok watched as the hobbit sank onto a flat stone, legs dangling over the edge. You put yourself in danger for me, the giant said. Bram shrugged weakly. I put myself in danger all the time. Usually it's just smaller danger. Tharok considered him. Why? Bram stared out at the valley, at the scattered lights of tents and the dark shapes of abandoned homes. Because if strength never learns restraint, he said, and fear never learns mercy, then stories only ever end one way. The giant felt the truth of it settle deep within him. In that moment, Tharok understood something his long life had never taught him. That kindness was not the absence of power, but the discipline of it. And discipline, he was learning, was harder than destruction. Above them, stars broke through the thinning clouds. For the first time since waking, Tharok did not feel like a threat. He felt like a choice. The world was watching, quietly now, and the cost of kindness, though heavy, suddenly seemed worth bearing. Where legends are born, not measured. Legends are often born in fire. It's in screams and shattered stone, in blood-staining soil and names, etched onto memorials long after the reasons for dying have been forgotten. Tharok knew those kinds of legends well. His people had been them, walking catastrophes reduced to cautionary tales once the world decided it no longer wanted to remember balance, only victory. But this legend, this one, began quietly. with morning light spilling into the valley and revealing that nothing had been destroyed. The soldiers woke stiff and wary. Scouts reported no movement from the giant. Villagers who had fled crept back toward their homes, eyes wide, steps hesitant. Children peeked from behind carts and stone walls, curiosity warring with fear. And there, unmoving against the mountain, sat Tharok Stoneborn, not advancing, not hiding, waiting. Bram woke late, stiff and sore, a blanket of woven grass pulled over him, placed there sometime during the night. He sat up slowly, then froze. The blanket was the size of a field tarp. He looked up. Tharok watched him, expression unreadable but softer. "You were cold," the giant said simply. Bram laughed, a short, surprised sound that turned into something warmer. "I was," he admitted. "Thank you." The sound echoed strangely against the mountain, and a few soldiers below stared upward in disbelief. A giant, a hobbit, talking like neighbors. Word spread faster than fear ever had. By midday, the captain returned, this time without raised weapons. He stopped at the same distance as before, helmet removed, posture cautious but no longer hostile. "You kept your word," the captain said. "So did you," Tharok replied. The man nodded once. "The council will want answers." "They always do," Bram muttered. Tharok looked down at him. "Will you go with them?" Bram felt the weight of the question. He could return to Willowbend, to gardens and familiar paths, to a life where his curiosity would again be tolerated but never truly welcomed, or he could stay. "I think," Bram said slowly, "that if I leave now, they'll start telling the story without me." Tharok understood. "Then stay," the giant said. "Help me speak in a language they can hear." So Bram stayed. Days turned into weeks. Tharok learned to move with intention, each step planned, each shift measured. He reshaped the mountain not by force, but by patience, carving paths that stabilized slopes, redirecting water to prevent floods, sheltering villages from rockslides with his own body when storms came. The valley changed. Children grew bold enough to wave. Farmers discovered that crops thrived in the shadow of the mountain where winds were gentler. Travelers stopped fleeing and started watching, and stories began to change, not of a monster, but of a guardian who listened. Bram became a bridge, small feet walking between camps and councils, small voice carrying truths too large to ignore. He never claimed the giant was harmless. He never asked anyone to forget fear. He asked them to balance it. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, Bram sat beside Tharok's resting hand, sketchbook open. "What will they call you?" Bram asked. Tharok considered. "They once called me Stoneborn, before that World Shaper, and now." The giant looked out over the valley, at smoke curling from hearths, at people moving without panic, at a world slowly relearning how to share space. "Now," he said, "they may call me whatever they wish." Bram smiled and added a title beneath his drawing. "The giant who chose to stand still. And me?" Bram asked lightly. Tharok's massive finger tapped the page gently, careful not to tear it. You, the giant said, will be remembered as the small one who taught a mountain how to listen. Bram closed the book. As night fell and stars ignited the sky, the valley slept, not in ignorance but in trust. And that was how the legend was born, not measured by size, not forged by destruction, but shaped carefully, bravely, by restraint, kindness, and one hobbit who refused to believe that small meant insignificant. Epilogue. The day the world grew wider years later, travelers would still slow their steps when Grondilspire came into view, but not to flee. They paused to look. The mountain no longer felt like a warning. It felt like a presence, steady, watchful, woven into the rhythm of the land. The paths curved naturally around its base, carved not by force but by careful guidance. Streams flowed where floods once threatened. Windbreaks stood where storms had broken roofs and spirits alike. Tharok Stoneborn remained, not as a ruler, not as a god, as a keeper. He learned the seasons the way small folk did, by watching crops, by listening to birds, by noticing when laughter returned sooner after winter. His strength reshaped less and supported more. When avalanches threatened, he diverted them. When drought came, he carried stone to guide water. When fear stirred again, as it always did, he stayed visible, still patient. And beside him, often with dusty feet and ink-stained fingers, walked Bram Thornfoot. Bram aged as hobbits do, slowly but visibly. Laugh lines formed around his eyes, his hair lightened, his steps shortened, yet his curiosity never dimmed. He wrote stories now, not just sketches, sent beyond the valley to places where giants were still spoken of only in whispers and warnings. He wrote of cost. He wrote of restraint. He wrote of the day a mountain learned to listen. Children grew up knowing the giant's shadow as something familiar. They learned which echoes were his breath and which were storms. They learned that power could kneel without breaking, and that courage did not need to roar. One evening, long after Bram's steps had finally slowed too much to climb the mountain paths, he sat on a stone bench overlooking the valley. Tharok crouched nearby, lower than he once would have dared, close enough for conversation without trembling ground. You know, Bram said, smiling faintly, they're telling stories about us now. Tharok rumbled softly. Are they true? Bram considered. Some are better. The giant nodded. That is the way of legends. Bram looked up at him. Promise me something. Name it, Tharok said. When they forget my name, and they will, don't correct them. Tharok frowned. Why? Because if they remember the choice, Bram said gently, the names won't matter. Tharok bowed his head, a movement that once would have shaken nations. I promise. When Bram Thornfoot finally passed, the valley mourned quietly. No bells rang in panic. No horns called soldiers. The giant did not roar or rage. He sat with the mountain and let the wind carry grief where it needed to go, and life continued. That too became part of the legend. So when people speak now of the giant and the hobbit, they do not ask who was stronger. They ask something far more important. Who taught the world how to choose differently?
There's nothing else you need to listen for now. Just let your breathing stay slow and easy. If you're still awake, that's okay. And if you're drifting off, let yourself go gently. I'll be right here next time. Rest well and good night.